That still is to date the most terrifying decision I made in my entire life. I felt very confident that I would either get what I wanted or die.
He is the man behind acquisition.com. It is the one and only Alex Hormozi.
Alex has been absolutely taking the internet by storm over the last year or two.
My dad always told me that you only get one name, so invest in it accordingly. If that's the price I have to pay to make the impact I want to have, then I pay that price every time.
So what changed?
Kylie Jenner. Kylie Jenner changed my life.
You're listening to the Erika Taught Me podcast, the #1 business podcast in the US, where we talk about entrepreneurship, money, and how to improve your life and achieve success. I'm your host, Erika Kullberg. I'm a lawyer and personal finance expert with over 20 million followers on social media. Today, I'm going to talk with Alex Hormozi. He's an entrepreneur, and him and his wife were able to generate $120 million across 4 different industries. In this episode, Alex and I talk about his journey to success, how to put in the hours, and the power of using social media. He gives his best advice for entrepreneurs and what we should be aiming for when building a business. I'm Erika Kullberg. This is Erika Taught Me, and today we're here with Alex Hormozi. So Alex, what is a view that you have that got you to where you are at today that most people would disagree with?
So I guess the more commonly held view, so I'll answer the question in a roundabout way. The more commonly held view is that things should be fast and they are just missing this one thing. And if they had that one thing, they would be successful. But the reality is it isn't one thing. It's 100 small things. And if you can accept that it's 100 small things, then you don't expect something to happen overnight, and you don't expect some secret that you're going to find. You don't put your hope in a mentor or to be a savior for you. And you realize that you were the only person who's going to have complete control over your own life. You're the only ones who can at least influence it. And so if you shift to that mentality, then everything's your fault. And then you actually can start making progress.
And what did it take for you to realize that?
I think I always thought that. Just realistically. I think I always thought that. I had a Middle Eastern father, immigrant, came here with nothing. So there was never an illusion that work was not required to get to where you wanted to go. I think that the moment where it really shifted though was probably in college. I was about 19 and everything had come easy to me. Like school wise, I did really well. I was president of like the newspaper and the literary magazine, vice president of the creative magazine. And so I just did really well with those things. I was in 3 varsity sports, like all that stuff. But in college, I went to Vanderbilt and everyone there was really smart. I was like, oh, okay. So I just always expected I could just not study for anything and like I would ace it, and I didn't have that happen. And so I ended up going fall break with like a 1.0 GPA, which is bad. And so he was like, hey, I'm just not going to keep you in school if this is what's going to happen. So I didn't go out, didn't do anything for the remainder of the semester. And I think I finished with a 3.2. So I basically got an A on every single assignment from that point going forward. And he said, cool. So now that we know what you're capable of, that's the expectation. And so bar was set. And that was probably the moment though, where I tied hours of work to outcome. And then that just became my MO. Like everyone knew it was like Hormozi's in class, at the library, at the gym, or at the cafeteria. There's the 4 things from 9 to 9 every day. And so I started taking being a student like a job. And so it was 9 to 9 every day. And I pretty much worked 12 hours a day since then. But it was just being okay with the fact that things were going to take time and I had to do them for an inordinate period of time without convincing myself I was smarter than I was, and let time have its moment.
Yeah. And after college, you went to this very traditional route of going into management consulting.
Yeah.
And you eventually quit that
Yeah.
to start the gyms.
Yes.
Can you talk about that moment where you decided that I'm going to quit, I'm going to try something different that's not on that standard path?
Yeah, that still is to date the most terrifying decision I made in my entire life. And so for anybody who's on that edge or that precipice, like I can only promise you that it actually just gets easier. Because like once you burn the boats there, I had to do this risk analysis, which was, okay, if I continue down this path, I am guaranteed to not get what I want. On this other path, I'm not guaranteed to get it, but I have a shot at getting it. And so from a risk adjusted basis, it made more sense for me to risk it because it was the only chance I had at getting what I wanted, which for me, my mental math at the time was I wanted to make $1 million a year and I wanted to not work that much. That was at least my like thought process at the time. And I figured that if any company would pay me $1 million a year, because there's really, at least at that point, I only saw 2 main tracks for that, which would be investment banking, finance / management consulting. Those are kind of like the only two paths that I could see in front of me that would pay me that kind of money. But I knew that if I was going to get paid $1 million a year, they're going to be ripping $10 million out of my soul every year. And so that didn't seem like an acceptable outcome. And so seeing that, I decided to quit the really prestigious job that looked great on LinkedIn and Facebook and all my college friends and all that stuff, to start a gym, which, my parents were thrilled about with my Vanderbilt education, that's where I was choosing to go. But again, it was from a risk standpoint. I knew a lot of people say like, I want to be a business owner someday. But I thought, well, what would I have to use as qualifiers for what someday would look like? Like, what would that day have to look like in order for it to happen? And I reasoned at least that the later I got in my life, the harder it would be to change because I would be making more money in the future than I was today. I would have more responsibilities than I do today. I would have wives, kids, etc. I'd also probably have more asset. I'd probably have a house, bigger, car, whatever. And so it seemed to me that the lowest risk time that I would be able to course correct if I failed was in my 20s. And so that plus what I was saying earlier about guaranteed to not get what I wanted to go. For those two reasons, I took the jump, but it still took me 6 months to make the jump. And I talked to like my closest friend at the time pretty much every day for like an hour, just heeing and hawing until finally I called him when I was like in Ohio, and I'm from Maryland. And I didn't want to let anybody know that I had left because I didn't want anyone to talk me out of it. And so that was what ended up, being the breaking point to get there.
Are you typically very calculated in your decisions? Like all of your decisions take those 6 months, or do you go with your gut now where you make a decision in a spur of moment?
It's not a gut thing. I think I'm pretty calculated with decisions, but I don't think that decisions need to take a long time. And I think that I would say that as we've progressed in business, our speed of decision making has decreased. You know what I mean? Because I can accept mistakes much more easily now and realize that most of the biggest mistakes have come from delay more than actual wrong doings. Because a lot of times it's like happy to glad decisions. It's like, okay, should we rent or should we buy the building? It's like, but like, will either of them have like a material like change in our lives? No. So I just basically put decisions in two buckets, which is it a reversible decision or an irreversible decision? And then if it is irreversible, to what degree is it irreversible? So like having a kid, very irreversible. Marriage, less irreversible, but still pretty irreversible. Tough, right? To get out of there. Where we're going to go for lunch today, like irreversible, but very low stake. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
which I think is partially why people struggle with it so much, because it is an irreversible decision, but it also doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's, which I do think as a hack is just knowing what you eat for most of the meals that you have just makes life so much easier and wastes so much less time. But on the reversible decision side, then those ones we just say, I like using the term, what's my best bad guess? Caleb's probably heard me say this 100 times. I'm like, this is my best bad idea. This is my best bad guess. And so it sets the bar lower for the expectation of yourself and others. Not to say that you don't have high expectations of yourself, but in terms of like having a way to put language around decreasing your action threshold to do something. Just saying, hey, this is my best bad idea. And we only commit to one thesis at acquisition.com and everything we do, which is test and iterate. So that's what we commit to. We're not committing to this path. We're committing to test and iterate. And this is just the first test. And so seeing it that way, then it makes it just a tiny test on a much bigger process that we're all aligned with always. So it's just the only decision is which test we're going to run first, which is just less.
I know I was a corporate lawyer. I left this very prestigious law firm. And when I was going through that decision, similar to you, I was just thinking, what is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? And for me, the worst case scenario was like, maybe I would fail, but I would go back to find a law job. Like It's a degree that you can typically find a job with. When you were going through that decision, what was your best case scenario? What was the outcome you wanted? And then what would have been the worst case scenario?
So best case scenario is what I'm doing now. Worst case scenario was I would have a really good essay for business school, because I already took the GMAT too, because I wanted to like really shore up my options. I'd already applied to get a master's in accountancy too, because I figured if I had that plus my 2 years of management consulting, I would be positioned to do finance or management consulting really well going into B school. And I'd read that they liked having some entrepreneurial experience if you have that. And so to me, it was just that was actually a really big point from like the downside protection. It's like best case, I actually succeed, and I'm gonna zoom out for a second. When I looked at business school, for me, it was 200 grand in like opportunity cost, like hard cost plus what I wasn't going to make, probably more than that, 250. And then at the end of that, the median salary I think was like 110 or 120 from Harvard, somewhere in there, right? And so I figured if I took $250,000 and I took 2 years, I thought I could get close to making what my median was, except I would already be living my I'll be a business owner someday, and then I could, scale past that. And so that was kind of like the reasoning on that side. But to your point about the knowing that I could use it in an essay, which sounds so silly, to increase my likelihood of getting into a good school, actually was one of the major factors of me being okay of taking the jump.
It's interesting because I went through the same process. I wanted to go to business school too when I was already a lawyer at this
JD
law firm.
MBA. Oh,
Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
I took the GMAT while I was working these 100-hour weeks.
Yeah.
And I
Same.
think looking back at it, I think I wanted the Harvard or the Stanford as
Yeah.
a crutch to validate that I was a good entrepreneur. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so glad that I didn't end up going that path because I
Yeah.
think it would have been a 2-year waste of my time and a lot of money.
Yeah. It's, I'll say the one thing with like the super high tier schools, it's just the network. I mean, you're paying for a mastermind of sorts for, 200 grand or 250 grand for them to screen high likelihood people who you're going to want to do business with in the future. And so I think in that way, that's the main value. Besides that, I think the rest of it is like, I mean, half of it's like socializing. Like they even build that in because they know that's the value.
Isn't it funny though, now that we have social media followers, we can DM people. It's like the same network effect as an MBA.
Oh yeah, you could post a story and just be like, anybody know an amazing commercial real estate attorney who does deals over 50 million? And then like you'll get like 6 DMs. And you're like, perfect, wonderful.
Yeah, easy.
You just tap in. It's funny because this was a topic that Caleb and I have had a lot of talks about, because I'm sure because you see the TikTok world and the shorts world, and we're just barely getting into it. The amount of guruism around like networking tips and tricks and hacks and stuff. And networking has never been an issue for me because at least my perspective on it has been, if I provide sufficient value to everyone in my network, by extension, have access to everyone who I've already provided value to. And so it's like Joe Rogan doesn't need to go to networking events. Like, he's Joe Rogan. There was a neighbor I had who had a little kid who was 8 years old. We were driving somewhere, just got an ice cream, kids in the back. And she was saying, you've got to know the store owners. So like, these are and she said it. And then she like turned around because she wanted to teach her kid a lesson. And she was like, these are the types of people you have to know. You have to know these people, all right? Because you have to stay in contact and you have to know this stuff. And I remember hearing that and thinking to myself, I was like, no. I was like, I'm the person that everyone needs to be in contact with. And it was just a difference in worldview. Like, and it was fun. And she was a super networker. Like, but she'd never seen herself as the person to provide value. It was always like, how do I manage all of these hundreds of acquaintances? And she was an amazing networker, but it was just a different view. And I feel like, I mean, they're both fine. For me, it was better suited to my personality that way.
You mentioned earlier that when you quit your job, your best case scenario is where you're at right now, what you're doing. How would you describe that? And did you really anticipate that would have been your best case scenario?
Yes and no. Ultra success, yes. Path, no. I felt very confident that I would either get what I wanted or die. And I mean that genuinely. So I knew that I was just going to continue. You know what I mean? Because I was just in a tremendous amount of pain and the need of validation from exterior, that pain was motivation enough for me to just continue to drive no matter what happened until I got where I wanted to be. Now, obviously I have new goals now, but they're motivated a little bit differently. But by and large, yes, I did think that I was going to be successful. Did I think it was going to be necessarily through gyms and then a gym turnaround business? And then like, no, I didn't think that was. And I think that's kind of the push and pull of being opportunistic when things open up, but also being dedicated to the long-term path.
Do you still feel like you need the validation?
Probably to a degree. Yeah. I think a lot of it even just comes from internal validation. Like, I want to prove it to me. And so I think that's where a lot of it comes from now. I'm sure there is some external stuff because humans are social creatures. And like, if everyone hated me tomorrow, I'm sure I'd have a bad day. But I think I would just say it's shifted in percentage. I would say, when I was 19, it was 99.999 everybody else and 0.001% me. And maybe now I'm 60-40, maybe 70-30 if I'm lucky, I'm having a good day. But, my goal is just to increase that percentage over time and maybe die close to 90-ish.
So after you quit, what was the first taste of success you had that gave you validation that maybe that was the right decision to quit and leave my job?
I actually saw pretty rapid success with the gym. So I was fortunate in that way. I made profit every month. The first month I broke even. The second month I made $5,000, which was what I was making at the consulting job, more or less. The next month I made 10,000. Next month I made 15, 20, and then it kind of went from there. And so I had immediate validation. I would say I didn't feel secure. I felt like it was going to be over tomorrow, always. I would say that feeling has taken a long time to get rid of. And I would say that truthfully right now, I don't have that feeling, but I have certainly had that at times with Gym Launch in the earlier days, Prestige Labs in the earlier days, the gyms. Absolutely. When I was running those, I was like, tomorrow, everything could go away, So I think that has diminished. But yeah, from the get go, and that's probably not the standard entrepreneur story, but I slept at the gym. I mean, people hear the sleeping in the gym part and they're like, oh, like he went through the grind, and I did. But I was also like stacking every single dollar that came in and just plowing it in my bank account because I had no employees. And the only thing I paid for every month was the rent for the facility. And I did everything to run an entire gym. Like imagine a gym you walk into and there's no employees. There's one guy. And I did that for like 6 months.
What is now to you? Is now what you're doing hard, or are you in an easy phase?
Hard changes. Like the way the heart feels is different. So like when I was starting out, the hard was just sheer exhaustion and fatigue of just like my first session would start at 4:30. My last sales consult ended at 10 o'clock at night. And then I would do all the billing and process all the contracts and whatnot, which ended at 11:30. And then I would sleep right there, like on the floor. And then I did that because I didn't have to save the commute time. And then I would just wake up in a cold terror of stress. And I would be up and my shirt would be clinging to me because it's soaked in stress sweat. So that's what it felt like then. When we started doing Gym Launch, the stress was more around like money. It was cash flow issues of, okay, we're launching all these, we're launching 8 gyms next month. I've got to front hotels, airfare, rental car, per diems, ad spend, get all those, campaigns up and running. And I had to front all that cash off of last month's. So it was more like a managing the cash that was coming into the business thing, which was super stressful, but that was a different kind of stress. Gym Launch's hard was, well, one, it was realizing that there was an opportunity in licensing and just called digital products or B2B services that weren't like in person. Like that was the big unlock when we went from a few $100,000 a month. I think we were like 300 or 400 when we were doing like turnarounds in person to, 2 or 3, we ended at like 4.5 million a month, just riding that. But there, the issues were me. And so it was my character traits that were the deficiency at that point. So I feel like I had to change. Now I'm sure I had to grow at all these stages, but like my ability to handle stress in general, my focus had to increase because when you're a small business owner, you can shift the ship really, quickly, you can turn, you can pivot and all that kind of stuff. But when you have hundreds of families that are, if just on the employee side, but thousands if you include the customer base that are relying on you, it's like you can't make these snap decisions anymore. And so it's like I had to calm down and become less erratic. And that's where the stress and emotional tolerance fed into, okay, we have a bad day. Doesn't mean we need to change the strategy. It just means you had a bad day. And then what do? Nothing. That's all it is. So one of the things that's been a huge epiphany for me as we've gone through this journey is that, because I talk about character traits a lot, because when we look at portfolio companies, for the most time, we're betting on the jockey. I mean, like we understand the fundamentals of the business and we're betting on this market, et cetera. But like the number one thing, 80% of our scorecard is based on the entrepreneur. And so when we're looking at that, a lot of people, at least myself included, when I was coming up, I thought like, I'm impatient. I would speak that over myself. Like I'm an impatient person, and I wanted to be more patient. So the difference between somebody who's loyal to their wife and somebody who is not the fact that they might have their eye get caught, because that happens. They're human. You're going to have emotions, right? But the difference between somebody who's loyal or not is whether they cheat, right? And so I think that it's the same thing with patience. It's the same thing with honesty. It's not, do you want to lie? It's, do you choose not to despite wanting to lie? Right. And it's just like courage, which is the famous one with like, it's not the absence of fear, but taking action despite it. And so I think a lot of those character traits, a lot of people, it feels like these amorphous things that we want to have and like take off the shelf and put inside of ourselves. And so we think that we need to feel a certain way in order to be a patient person or be a kind person or whatever, when at least in my experience, it's been, you don't feel that way. And you take the action that a patient or kind or courageous or loyal or honest person would take despite the feeling. And that was it. That was a huge unlock for me in terms of understanding my stress levels, in terms of decision making within the company. Like if I want to be a long-term thinker, then I have to, despite not wanting to, act in the interest of the long term. And I think when I started doing that, the compounding of the businesses in general started to really unlock.
I think it comes down to discipline, probably.
Yeah. Short term. Yeah. Being able to be uncomfortable in the short term for whatever you want in the long term. Absolutely. But yeah, in the final chapter, which you consider with acquisition.com to close the loop on that. The hard now is just, I would say it's those character traits that I just went over, but just more. It's just the standard of patience is higher, the standard of discipline is higher, the standard of focus is higher. And so it's not, and even to further this point, character traits are not binary, right? They're not, you are patient, you are not patient. It's how patient are you? It's not you're dishonest or honest, it's how honest are you? And so I think that maybe what was able to get me through Gym Launch Prestige Labs and Alan was maybe like a 7 out of 10. And like to get to a billion plus, which is what we're on the path to do now, I got to be a 9. You know what I mean? And maybe to get to 10 billion, I got to be a 9.5. And so at least I would say that's what hard feels like, is choosing the actions that I know is aligned with the person that I need to be in order to do the thing I want to do, despite not feeling like it.
What types of books or podcasts or media are you consuming to help you to develop these views?
Not many. I'm not super heavy on consumption, to be honest with you. I would say that the degree of my consumption is mostly, as silly as it sounds, our stuff, just to make sure that it's like looking okay. It's like, I'd say like proofing our own stuff is like, I would say 70%, which sounds ridiculous, but it is. That's also because it's a very small percentage. Just to be fair, it's a small percentage of my time. And then the other 30% is like, if you looked at my Twitter, the vast majority of the people that I follow is philosophy stuff. So it's like, you know what I mean? If you look at my Instagram, the only people that I'm really following are people that I want to just see what they're doing rather than consuming their content. I just want to see, like, understand their strategy, their cadence, how they caption stuff. Are they doing anything new? Because I'm new into that world, in the content world. And so I'm just trying to learn. And so but I don't have any specific people that I consume a lot from. I mean, most of my learning comes from doing. I had this myth that I used to believe that, like, if I read a book, I would somehow have a skill. And I feel like when you read a book, you have like a general idea of like the vague outline of what the skill might be, right? And so like you learn so much more from your first 100 sales calls than you will from reading every single book in the library on sales.
Yeah.
And so I think that belief shifted actually when I was doing, when I was in that 6-month terrible period of my life where I was like deciding whether to stay or go. I read, I think, like 10 or 15 self-help books, and I realized that my life hadn't changed. And so then I almost like decried all of the, hopefully it's not too graphic, but like the mental masturbation of just like, I'm learning. But like, I wasn't really learning because it didn't actually affect my behavior. And if you look at behavioral conditioning, they say the definition of learning is that when you put the same condition and you have a different behavior. And so if someone does something in a condition and then they learn something and then you present the same condition, if their behavior changes, they have learned something, right? Which either happens through reinforcement or punishment. That's it. And so I was consuming all the stuff and in the same condition, which means that I had learned nothing despite consuming a lot of content. And so once I realized that behavior and action was the thing that actually got me to learn. And so I biased all of my activity towards that rather than massive consumption of information. And I figured I would learn more from doing than from learning how to do. And that ended up being true.
Now you're creating content. How do you want people to consume your content so that they can actually just go and do things with it versus just feeling like they're consuming 15 Alex Hormozi videos and like they feel like they can check it off their list, but they really haven't progressed at all?
Use and do. Like watch, do. I think our videos are more tactical than many of the videos that are out there. And that's by design. And so my vision for the content was I want to make stuff that people would otherwise charge lots of money for and then just give it away for free. And at least from the response in the comments in the community, like that seems to be how it's received more or less. And so that was the goal. But the absolute, by and large, what I want everybody in Mozy Nation to do is consume, execute, and keep executing until you realize you hit another point where you need to consume more and consume the next thing. And then you can search for specifics. So it's like if churn's high, go to my channel and search churn stuff and then just try and watch the videos that are around churn. If you're like, I need sales stuff because I'm just getting on the phone with people and I can't close, watch the sales stuff and keep like, there's a concept of like drilling. Like you can watch, like there's like immersing yourself in something. So it's like for like sales guys, I want them to consume an hour a day of sales content because I want their subconscious, I want their discretionary time to be thinking about sales, but still the majority of their day is selling, which is that a system will grow until it is constrained and then it will grow no longer until that constraint is fixed. And so we just like, and when we look at the portfolio companies, usually like our expertise comes down to, can we identify accurately what the true constraint of the business is and can we fix it? And if we can do those two things, then those are companies that we want to take on immediately because we know what the first constraint is and then we can anticipate what the next one's going to be. And then we know we can fix that too. And so a lot of times entrepreneurs get stuck, or even employees get stuck, because they don't realize the constraint of their system output is a skill deficiency, a trait deficiency, or a belief deficiency. They don't believe something's possible that is. Or rather, said differently, they believe something to be true that isn't. And that's what's holding them back.
I want to take a little step back. So my friend, you were on his podcast 3 years ago, and it was so funny to me when I listened to the intro, because in the intro, it was like, Alex Hormozi does not believe in social media. He does not have any social media. So what changed?
Kylie Jenner. Kylie Jenner changed my life. I saw her on the cover of Forbes, and I was like, she's younger than I am, and she's a billionaire, and I feel like I know more about business, and I need to learn from that. And so I will study everyone. The good, the bad, the ugly, people that everyone hates, I will study. People that everyone love, I'll study. Anyone who's making more money than me, I'll study. And so when I saw that, it was such a paradigm shift for me. I was like, how is this possible? And I mean, mind you, like at the time, for context, I was taking home, I think, do you know what year it was? I was taking home between 13 and 17 million a year personally at that time. And I thought I was doing pretty well. And then I saw that, and I just felt horrible about myself. It like ruined like a week of my life. But what came from that was then all of a sudden, to be honest with you, I didn't change anything after that. I was like, it's a fluke. Her mom's Kris Jenner. She organized her whole life. Okay. But then after that, Huda Beauty came out, and then boom, she was at 600. And then after that, Conor McGregor, boom, he was at 600 with Proper 12. And then The Rock came out with Termana, and he's at 2 to 4 billion, depending on who you're looking at. And it just happened again and again and again. And I was like, I'm missing something here. Like I believed something that was true that wasn't. I believed that the only thing that you would need to grow a business was paid ads and outbound. If you do those things, it doesn't matter about anything else. Doesn't matter your brand. Doesn't matter about your content. You can go and sell shit, and you can. That's the thing, is like, there are beliefs that will get you to a certain degree, and you absolutely can make money. You can be a decamillionaire. I mean, I was obviously a decamillionaire at that point, arguably almost a centimillion if you put the equities in, right? But for me to be a billionaire, I didn't understand brand, and it was my big deficiency. And when I saw each of those, I was like, oh, I have to get into this. But I still didn't do it. The last, soldier on this little thing was, I went to a thing with Dean Graziosi, who's Tony Robbins' like right-hand man. Not right, they're together, it doesn't matter. And we went to his house, and he had like 3 people that week who like weird stalker, weird stuff. And I was like, dude, how are you willing to put up with this? Like, I never want to be that famous. I want no one to know me. I want to be rich as hell, and that's it. And I was very committed to that. He said, if that's the price I have to pay to make the impact I want to have, I'll do it every day of the week. And he just looked at me, and I just remember just feeling it in my chest. I have to do this. And so that was when I decided, and I started making YouTube videos shortly thereafter. And that was kind of the beginning of me starting to post stuff with the intention of actually building a brand.
And what did you have to assemble or get ready in order to do that? Did you hire a social media team or?
Yeah, I didn't. Well, I had infrastructure with Gym Launch, so I just had the video guy post it at the time. So I just did that because that was easy. It was low lift for me. But I've definitely learned a lot about the content game in general. And what's funny is that the principles that I learned from outbound and paid ads 100% mapped to content, and I still had to learn it as though I didn't know. And so like, volume is still king. Like, the more you spend on ads, the more money you make. The more cold calls, the more cold emails, the more cold reach outs you do, the more sales you make. The more content you put out, the more impressions you get, the more, like, everything grows that way. And so, because like, quantity is the only forcing metric for quality. Like, the only way you get better at something is by doing it more. And so I had to do a shitload of it. And that's basically what we've built over the last 18 months. As I started just posting 3 times a week, just videos from a computer, which have been relatively, notorious for being terrible quality, and then slowly, added an editor. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe I should do, a guy approached me and was like, I could do shorts for you. And I said, okay, I don't want to do shorts. And he said, you have to do nothing. I will just take all of the stuff that's already out there, and I will do all the work, and I will post it for you. So you literally do nothing. I was like, okay, sold. And he did it, and he did a good job. And so we started growing, and I was like, oh, the short stuff's interesting. Okay. So like, this is starting to work. And so once I saw that actually became kind of the blueprint for how we approached new platforms, et cetera. So we find the best person we can, we pay whatever it is that they ask for. And we do that with the expectation. We say it up front. We say, I'm going to steal everything you have. That's what I'm going to try and do. So I just want to be upfront, and I think it's going to take us probably between 3 and 6 months to do that. So you factor in what your LTV is for it to make sense for you. And if they're cool with it, then we're good. And our entire goal is not to just have them do it, but for us to study every aspect of what they're doing and why they're doing it so that we can bring it in-house. And so we've pretty much, as soon as things started, that one vendor worked out, I basically did that with every platform very quickly. And then one by one, we started peeling them back in-house. And so right now we're probably 2/3 in-house, 1/3 vendor, and probably by, 6 months we'll be 100% in-house.
And I think now I saw on Think Media that you've hit 1 million followers in 6 months.
And we've done even more. Yeah, it's cool because media is compounding, and so I always look for compounding vehicles in general. And so it was again like Dodo Bird Alex. Like it took me a while to figure out that media in and of itself grows in a compounding way. And I was like, oh wow, so this is not something that I always saw content where you post something and then it disappears. It's a waste. When I was coming into it, I was like, why would I post something and then no one's ever going to see it again? But what I didn't realize was the asset was the audience, not the content.
Yeah.
And that was my missing link. And so once I understood that, that's when I went all in on building the brand and doing the media stuff.
So you don't want the fame from the social media. What do you want?
I'm okay with the fame now. There are cons to it, but I would say there are more pros than cons, at least at the level that I'm at right now. So I'm okay with it. I am still here to make money. And I always want to be clear because I don't want to be put into a corner in the future where people are like, he's trying to make, I'm always here to make money. That's what I'm trying to do. But I also, because from the brand and the vision stuff that I've, learned as an entrepreneur, telling employees hey, our whole goal is to make money, not very motivating, right? And so the big reason that we do all the stuff we do, so we donated a few $1 million to kids' charities for education because I'm a big education guy. And so the big vision is to document and share the best practices of building world-class companies. And so for me to have the credibility to be able to say that is my mission, I got to be able to back that up. And so the portfolio that becomes worth $1 billion and then 10 billion and then whatever it'll become after that is just to answer the question, why should I listen to you? Because it's at least my view that the number one question that everyone asks when they see anything, even if it's good, is why should I listen to this person? Because you have the teacher who's saying dollar cost average in the S&P, and then you've got Warren Buffett. They're going to listen to Warren Buffett, even if the content's worse, just because they don't have to make the extra decision of, should I trust this? And so it's actually less emotional effort because you actually don't have to put a decision filter. You can just take it as truth, which is it's easier for people. And so I want to make it easy for people to learn. And so I have to have the credibility to do that. Now, some people might say, you had a $50 million when you were 32. You'd already taken, almost 50 million in dividends before that point. You have the credibility, but I don't have the credibility from me. Because I want, the fact that we don't have a vlog from Jeff Bezos from 1997 until now crushes my soul. The fact that Elon only does the occasional weird interview, which is awesome, but nothing else. I, long-term, am willing to sacrifice growth for our companies to make the content that we're making because I think it means more than I do.
So a few years ago, when you were saying that no social media, you were at 17 million or so for personal income. Can you talk about how that's grown over the years?
So it hasn't grown because COVID was not good for gyms, unfortunately. You would have thought that gyms would have been totally benefited from COVID and not being allowed to do business. But I think in 2018, we did 26 million top line, 17 million take home. And I also didn't understand the concept of reinvesting in the business or M&A at that point. So I was just cool. So 17 million in profit, I'll leave $1 million in the business, and then I will just scoop 16 million in my bank account. That's what I did. And then the next year, we reinvested more money into supplements and software. And so we still grew though. We did 37 million top line, and then we did, I think 13 million is what I took out that year. And then 2020 was COVID, which was 3 months in, and we actually had planned to sell. We went to market the month before COVID started. And so that sucked because it was based on 17 and 13 as the and with a growth rate going into it. But anyways, over that year, I think we ended up taking home personally 9 or 10, somewhere in there. And then the next year, we probably would have paced the same thing because the way COVID hit gyms, at least for us, was it was a smiley face, and with January being the middle of the smiley. So it's kind of half fucked 2 years. But because we were on an upward trajectory coming out of January and they loosened some of the COVID stuff, we just pretty much started going straight up to the right. And so we closed that deal in December of 21, and that was 46, plus whatever we took home that year, which is probably around 10. And then, now it's 2022. And so we went super aggressive in acquisitions because that year in 2021, the reason I actually decided to go through the sale, I actually almost backed out of the sale twice, was because I had done 3 deals that year, and all 3 were going really well. And so I realized, I was like, I really like this a lot. And for me, like my big thing is, it's almost like if you wake up in the morning and you're not thinking about your wife and you're thinking about somebody else, like you need to fix that one way or the other. Like you got to fix that problem. And so like I wasn't thinking about my wife being gym lunch anymore. I was thinking about these companies. I was thinking about growing them, and like I was starting to get excited about all that stuff. And this just wasn't as exciting for me. And I just saw a bigger vision for what I wanted to do. And so we did those 3 acquisitions, and then over the last 9 months, we've done another 8. So we have 11 now. And so we do minority stakes. And so the portfolio right now does just under 200 million top line. We generally are between 20 and 30% owners of those companies. And they are usually bootstrapped, profitable, growing, cash flow positive, because we run they're usually, they're profitable businesses. So I'd say around between 35 and 40% net margins on those businesses. And so that's what we do now.
Is the hope that the social media will help you attract more companies that may want to take on more investment?
Yeah, 100%. I just figure Warren Buffett had a great model. Let's do the same thing except add media. Like I'm a big believer in like simple things. So we have a strategy deck that's like, what are the need to believes for this to be true? So one is that Alex can gain a social media following. I didn't know that. So like, it sounds silly, but like I had a big list of like, well, if it doesn't work, then that's gonna affect my thesis, right? So that was number one. Number two was that me making content will turn into deal flow for us. And so I didn't know if that was gonna be true. I didn't know if I was just gonna make content and people would just be like, cool, thanks so much, this is awesome. But it did translate into deal flow. And then from there, the next need to believe was that I would be more popular in the future than I am today. And so if that's true, then we will get an increasing amount of deal flow in both quality and quantity in the future than we do now. The fourth need to believe was that we would be able to add material or outsized returns or value through our own experience by taking on companies that fit we call it the VAM, but it's like our value acceleration method. So it's like if it's in the sweet spot of the VAM, then we should be able to deliver on that. And so right now, like the average portfolio company triples profit in the first 12 months. We average 4.7x profit in the first 24 months. So we've delivered, we feel pretty good about it. But that was a need to believe. Like, you come in obviously hoping and believing that you're going to do that, but especially because in a minority position, I don't have complete control. And so that was a little bit of something that I had to learn how to do and influence the right way to get the founder on board for changes, et cetera, which to be fair, for the most part, because of how people are coming in, it's not that hard, but it's still a difference of do this versus I was thinking this might be something you'd consider. What do you think? Right? And so it's just a little bit different dynamic. And so those were the need to beliefs to get to where we are now. And I have more need to beliefs in the future, but I'll share those later.
What do you think is the biggest threat to your success?
Me saying something and getting canceled for some reason. Like that's what I think. I mean, threats wise, yes. Do I think I would adapt? Yes. But like in terms of like, because I will either win or I will die. And so if that's my base operating system, like I will adapt and I'll figure something out. It's just, I was already thinking, I was like, what would I do? I was like, okay, well, I'd have a different figurehead. I'd have multiple personalities. We'd pump them the same way that we did with me. Like we'd work it out, but that would be a dent.
It is scary, especially people with cancel culture now. They just love to pile on about everything.
Yeah. So I think in a single word, it's irreparable brand damage.
Yeah.
Is, obviously I try not to do anything that, that I think would do that, but that's, that would be the single bigger thing. But again, it's not even irreparable. I would just have to work around it.
I read somewhere that your goal is to become the most jacked billionaire. So why is that your goal and how do we get there?
I thought it was funny mostly. But I figured it was just become a billionaire. And at that point, I will probably be the most jacked guy in the room. And so it was kind of like default. Like I can just be me and then be a billionaire and by default will be the most jacked billionaire.
Do you think Jeff Bezos is jacked?
Yeah, he's not more jacked than I am.
Okay.
He's way wealthier than I am. He's more financially jacked than I am, but he's but not physically, not yet.
Why is the billionaire thing your goal?
I think it's really just a milestone. It's way less about like the actual $1 billion, but I do think to the point earlier about like having the credibility to like there still has I could be unaware, but I haven't seen any like mega billionaires really try and build education for everyone of how to get all the way up. Not just like your first 10K, first 100K, first million, first 10 million, first 100 million. Like I want to go all the way.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's really the document don't create. It's like, I want to go all the way and show every single step of the process, how I did it so other people can do it. And I think the reality is, my hope is that we'll pave the way for people to be much bigger than I am. You know what I mean? Like, we've talked about this a lot, but like, Gary didn't have Gary, right? Gary just paved the way for people like us to go do what we're doing. And we learn from their mistakes and their best practices, and we don't have to wait 10 years to learn it. He did, because he had to figure it out, and then we just start today. You know what I mean? And the fact that there's like 23-year-old multimillionaires and decamillionaires right now off social media, it's just testament to the fact that the entrepreneurs who came before them laid the path. And so I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for those people. I also don't have the illusion that, a lot of people are like the GOAT and they want to be the greatest of all time. And I think that if you're the greatest of all time, then you failed, because especially if you want to be a teacher of some kind, which is a relatively loaded word, but if you want to pass on lessons to other people, if you were the greatest of all time, then you failed. So the only way to be the greatest of all time is to not be.
Yeah.
And to have set the stage for people who are younger, who I don't know, to beat me. And I got to be okay with that. And I am. But that was a mindset shift that I had to do. So like, this is just like, I'm going to do this thing. I think it's really cool, because this is just what I happen to be really into. Like, I draw pictures about business. I write books about business. I make videos about business. I do business all day. Like, it's what I like. And so that's what I do. And I'm very fortunate in that the thing that I happen to like also happens to be very financially rewarding. I don't know what I would do if I just like loved painting and I didn't like business. Like, it'd probably be harder for me, but maybe it wouldn't be. I don't know. But this is just something that I love. And so I just want to document it. And I also partially document it for me, because if I feel like I don't understand something, it bothers the hell out of me. And so that's where all the frameworks and things happen, is so that I don't have to remember it. It's like, I have to make a framework for this. It's like, we haven't sent emails, which is ridiculous, because we have a bunch of people who give us their email every day, and I say, someday I'll email you. But right now I was like, I'm gonna have to write an email regularly. I have to have a framework for this. Like, everybody's like, I have to do this all the time. And so, but then as soon as I have it, I'll just pass it to everybody else, and then they won't have to confront the thing and learn and fail for however many months, and they'll just be able to take the template and use it, and then immediately be that much further ahead than I was at their age.
Yeah.
That's cool.
What would you say to the 20-year-old who's looking up to you and saying, I want to become a millionaire one day? What are the 3 things that they have to do to get there?
You have to start. You have to do the same amount of effort that the person who you think you want to emulate has done. So if you do the volume of work that that person did, and if you're like, well, that person's been doing it for 10 years, then do it for 10 years. And you don't switch gears, and you stay on the path that you're on, because otherwise you have to restart over and over again. Because a lot of the trench knowledge comes from depth of knowledge, right? It comes from having deep roots, in a subject or a sector. And I know that counteracts the whole idea of like sampling lots of things. And I get that that's a struggle for people. It also is not false that somebody who started at 20 and worked for 10 years in the same industry versus somebody who started at 20 and jumped to 30 different things, the guy who did one thing for 10 years will be further along. The question is, what's the longevity? So if they did the one thing for the decade, was it because they enjoyed the thing? Which then, if they hated it, then they do switch, but now they switch way later, and so then they do pay that cost. So the thing that makes this even harder is that you usually don't like stuff that you suck at. You usually suck at everything when you start. And so I do believe that, like, if something interests you, like, you don't need to, like, I'm not even a big believer in like being good at it. If you just don't have to put effort into wanting to consume the thing, whether it's like, I really like video stuff, or like I really like sales stuff, or really like marketing stuff, or really whatever it is that you find yourself reading. For me, I always liked persuasion. So like when I would like be in college, I like watched TED Talks on persuasion. It was just interesting to me. And so it's not surprising to me that I ended up finding myself in kind of acquisition and whatnot, customer acquisition, on a tactical level in the beginning. And so if you find interest, then it's like you just have to strap in and accept the fact that you're going to suck for a very long time, and that's okay. And it should be to be expected. And so I think if somebody's 20 years old, they need to expect that it's going to take a decade, number one. Number two, they have to start on a path and not convince themselves to stop. And then number three, see items 1 and 2.
The podcast is called Erika Taught Me, but really today is all about Alex Hormozi taught me. So what do you want people to be able to walk away from this saying, Alex Hormozi taught me this?
Alex taught me that the feelings that I have are independent of the character traits that I want to espouse. And so if I want to be more courageous, it doesn't mean that I don't feel fear. It means that I act despite it. If I want to be more patient, it doesn't mean that I don't want to stop doing the thing that I'm doing. It means that I feel that feeling, I accept it, and then I continue on the path that I said I was going to do. And so I think a lot of it, we said it very briefly in the beginning, but it's enduring short-term discomfort for long-term achievement. And so if there's one thing that everyone who is listening to this does, it's that you start on the path and you do not allow yourself to stop.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to hear more from Alex, He has a YouTube channel that I'm going to link in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, it would mean a lot if you could take a moment to leave a review for the podcast. It really helps support the work that we're doing. Thank you for spending your time with me today, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday on a brand new episode of Erika Taught Me.